It's been a jam-packed edition of the Sports Cubicle here on WCPT 820 and HeartlandSignal.com. I'm Mike Mercado here with the one and only Paul Chivari, and it's been an episode talking about media, talking about all the different aspects of new media. And what's interesting is consumerism in sports. And this is something that we're seeing all around because it's not just regional sports. It's teams relocating, looking for new stadiums. We're seeing what's happening in Tampa Bay after the hurricane. They don't want to get on that lease. They're going to have to play now where the Yankees have their spring training. Mm-hmm. We're seeing what's happening with West Sacramento. So obviously the big thing is real estate and owning a stadium. And here on the Sports Cuba, we've been talking about the Chicago Bears and everything that's been happening with their stadium and Kevin Warren. And a new story has kind of come out over the last few days, and it's from Crain's Chicago Business. So I want to check this out really fast, Paul, and get your thoughts. This is from WGN by Ellie Ong and Julian Cruz. Already amid coaching chaos on offense, the Chicago Bears threw another wrench into the news Tuesday. Reconsideration of the Michael Reese Hospital site as a possible location for a new stadium, according to Crain's Chicago Business. Per Justin Lawrence reporting for Crain's, team leadership is changing their tone on the 49-acre property, which they previously deemed unsuitable for construction of the Bears' new home. Lawrence wrote that financial structure for Michael Reese campus is unknown at this time, but the Bears understand they need a large private investment and may hope constructing a stadium on a long, vacant south side development could garner the more political support, especially among Chicago politicians at the state capitol. Quote, it could potentially be a jolt around economic development for the Brownsville community, Alderman Lamont Robinson of the Fourth Road told WGN Wednesday. We need economic development. We need retail. We need affordable housing for working folks. The announcement is the latest in a series of topsy-turvy moves the franchise has made in hopes of getting construction of a new stadium off the ground, only for roadblocks to appear and stall development at several junctures. Team president, CEO Kevin Warren has been adamant about keeping the Bears in Chicago and building a new stadium along the lakefront. But as recently as September, Friends of the Parks announced a coalition to oppose the most recent stadium proposal, where they and other allies expressed concerns over the burden it would place on city taxpayers. And you guys can check out the entire article over at WGN. Chicago Bears reconsider old Michael Reese Hospital site at new stadium location, and the full breaking down article at Crain's Chicago Business. Well, this is simple. You and I were doing a lot of coverage of the election here on WCPT, and we know both nationally and locally a lot of things were about the economy. A lot of things are about grocery prices, gas prices. Right now, the Chicago Bears have been trying to marry themselves to the hip with Mayor Brandon Johnson. They're trying to get taxpayer money. They're trying to convince J.B. Pritzker. When you hear this story, does it even really matter the location of where the stadium is going to be built? Where at the end of the day, if their ultimate goal, if Kevin Warren's ultimate goal is to get as much money paid for the stadium that doesn't come from McCaskey's, does any of it really matter where the location is when you hear a story like this, ultimately?
Well, when you phrase the question like that, I think that does matter, because with this Michael Reese Hospital site, I think it's only like 46 acres. It's relatively small when you compare what they wanted to do in Arlington Heights, which is, so like if the issue was land, Arlington Heights is always an option, regardless of the tax burden or the difficulties that they had with the school district out there. The issue with Soldier Field and building right by it might also be a land issue in terms of what you can use, what is deemed worthy enough to be built on, whether Friends of the Park or the city has anything to say about it. With this, now Friends of the Park, I think, is out of it because it's not on the park site. It's not on the lake, but it's near the lake. Location is decent in the sense that it's near McCormick Place. It's relatively near Soldier Field. It's relatively near Guaranteed Rate Field. The infrastructure-wise, it wouldn't need that much adjusting because Interstate 55 ends right at about there. Obviously, you're still drawing a lot of people to a congested area, but it almost takes people away from the South Loop where Roosevelt Road and McFetridge Drive, with Soldier Field. So on one hand, yes, Michael Reese looks like it doesn't ultimately matter, but I wonder if they're using this as leverage against Arlington Heights or right next to Soldier Field. And at the end of the day, regardless if they build a new stadium or not, we're still paying for Soldier Field renovations from 2002, and we're still paying for the White Sox guaranteed rate field. But I'd like to circle back to, we always play the promo for this show on the station with Andrew Zimbalist talking about it's not so much how much money it's going to bring, it's like how much civic pride it really is ultimately going to bring. And we know that if done correctly, this would be a long overdue venue for the city that would attract the Super Bowl, the Final Four, WrestleMania, the big major sporting events, the big major political conventions. We just had the United Center here, hosting the Democratic National Convention. But you get what I'm saying. Like you can because we don't have that supersized large indoor venue that can hold a bigger sport, a bigger sort of thing, that limits the city from certain opportunities. Would those opportunities bring enough of a economic boom to the area, like a Super Bowl or whatever? That's ultimately where it comes down to. But I think it's important that the Bears do build a new stadium. I mean, I know I'm kind of against it's a loss of money for the local, but I think it checks some boxes for the city that a world-class city like Chicago has not ever had. Whereas the White Sox can go pound sand because they don't need a new stadium. So it's interesting with the Michael Reese thing. I always thought that there's got to be places in the city and around the city where it's like, well, what about here? What about there? What about here? But I think it's still interesting that they own Arlington Heights. They own Arlington Park. They own that land. They can do whatever they want with that land. They still haven't decided what they want to do with that land.
Spend over $200 million for it.
But they still are committed to the city and the lakefront.
But that was after Kevin Warren was brought in, so always remember the timeline.
Yeah.
Arlington Heights is Ted Phillips and George McCaskey.
Okay.
Everything that is
Kevin Warren has been
is the lakefront.
But at the same time, they haven't sold that property in Arlington Park. Because that could easily have been turned into commercial development, industrial development. You know what I'm saying? But the fact that they haven't yet means that that's the safety net. That's the there's always money in the banana stand.
Sure.
That's what that is. But they want to build that crown jewel that is, well, this is Soldier Field Part 2. Yeah. This is Soldier Field is over 100 years old. Soldier Field is retrofitted with modern stuff on top of an old design. It's as beautiful as it was and is, and the colonnades and all that. There are certain elements of it that are completely outdated and aren't up to code, and it's a chance to start over. And as far as the status of it being a national landmark, that's gone. The status of it being a monument to soldiers, sure, that's there, but ultimately you could create a new monument. Yep. It's like I don't think it's like this would be a lot different than redoing the Vietnam Wall. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. This is just a stadium that was for civic pride 100 years ago, back when cities built this, and cities still build it now, but that's only because the shiesty corporate greed of lawyers and teams and leagues don't want to pay for this themselves. So I think it's interesting that what their intentions are, what they want versus what they have. And this just seems like leverage to me, or it seems like Kevin Warren being like, well, worst case scenario, we're going to get our stadium built in Chicago. But I'm worried that if they compromise to this level, they're going to do what they ended up doing with Soldier Field. They had an opportunity with Soldier Field in the 90s and the 2000s to build a brand new stadium, and everyone cried when it was, they can't go to Aurora, they can't go to Hoffman Estates. The land was there, the opportunity was there to build their dome, the Mick Dome, the McCaskey Dome. Mm-hmm. There's articles about it in the mid-90s in the Chicago Tribune. Northwest Indiana, they chose not to do this. Instead, they got that. I like it, but it's ugly. The what they did with Soldier Field,
the spaceship in the Coliseum.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, here we are 20 years later, and we're still at the same problem that we had back in the mid 90s. So I think ultimately what's going to happen is they're going to fight with the city long enough to either get their stadium at Soldier Field, right across from Soldier Field, or they're going to build their crown jewel back in Arlington Park.
Never forget, it is, and you're seeing it with cities like Seattle in the NBA and Montreal for baseball. It is super expensive to keep a team. It's even more expensive to get back a team. So somebody like the White Sox, if you want a second team in baseball, if you're worried about where the Bears are moving, you got to make sure you make this decision correctly, because it's super expensive the next time you do it. Really fast before we get out of here, you mentioned that promo. This is Andrew Zimbalist. It's when he joined us. This is his thoughts on the development of new stadiums having in in their regional area. Economics professor at Smith College, Massachusetts, Andrew Zimis.
When Chicago is approached, or Illinois is approached for new public funds to build yet another stadium, it shouldn't be, hey, this is going to be an economic boon for the city. It's not going to be. It should be, how much is it worth to us culturally to keep these teams here?
We mentioned it. It's a world-class city. It needs world-class amenities, and it needs to be able to drive people to watch a sport. It needs this cathedral, but it's going to cost you a lot of money if you don't do it correctly. And you got to do it correctly right now. And the taxpayers are going to hold it just like we always do. It's just how bad is it going to be? But I'm challenging the Bears to do their part. They bumbled this so many times. Try to fit most of the bill. He's Paul Chivari. I'm Mike Mercado. We got a whole lot left on this edition of the Sports Cubicle on WCPT 820 and Heartland Signal.